talking to myself again. But it's the only...
Hi and welcome along to an NUFC Matters special with me, Steve Wraith, and I'm joined today by Malcolm MacDonald and John Gibson, and we're going to look back today on Malcolm's wonderful England career and some very special games there. And as I'm not the man who is the expert on these matters, I've read about them, of course, in many of these books that the guys have done together, and I've seen the clips on YouTube, but I was only in my pram when these games were taking place. So the man who's going to take us through this journey is John. Hi lads, how are you doing?
Good,
nice to see you, fellas.
Great stuff. John, over to you, mate. Where are you going to start?
Yeah, I'm going to start with a highlight because I always think you should go in big time right from the start. And the highlight has got to be when Malcolm set a record at Wembley, goal-scoring record of scoring 5 goals, which still stands. A magical moment, and I was privileged enough to be up in the bird's nest in the press box at the particular game. It was as Malcolm well knows, the European qualifying game, so a competitive game against Cyprus. The end result was England 5, Cyprus 0, and Malcolm scored all the 5 goals. I mean, a special thing for you, particularly, Malcolm. Can you take us through the build-up, mate, and the match itself?
Yeah. Well, Don Revie had been appointed the manager some 4 games before this particular match, and where I'd been a regular in Alf Ramsey's squad, not always a regular in the team, but I'd been a regular since '72, and Revie left me out for his first 3 games, and they struggled to score goals. And there was a massive clamour in the press, and it was actually naming me as the guy that he should select to overcome this goal scoring problem. And I was the highest goal scorer in the country at the time, and so he did select me, but this was the game before Cyprus. And so
yeah, West Germany.
It was West Germany, yeah. And this was their first game as world champions. Their previous game had been the World Cup final of '74, and so I arrived at the hotel on the Sunday night, West Park Lodge in Hertfordshire, and having checked in at reception, I then went through to the lounge where Don Revie was sat, and he always had an entourage all around him, and so I went into the room and I said, Malcolm MacDonald reporting. I said I've got no injuries from the game yesterday, and Don Revie, he looked up, looked at me, and he said, "I don't want you here." I thought, oh, what a start this is. He said, "I feel you've been foisted upon me by the press. And so," he said, "if you don't score, I won't pick you again." And I thought that was a little bit on the strong side. But it could have worried a lot of players. But I always try and look on the bright side of things. And I thought, well, at least I know I'm playing. I don't have to wait until the team's announced. He's pretty much told me that I'm going to be starting the game. And so I was able to sort of get my head right and work on my finishing in training. And all with this target set on Wednesday night, and so we played, and we started against West Germany. Midway through the first half, Colin Bell scored from about 12 yards, made it 1-0, and then and it was that at half time, and then we got into the second half, and in all honesty, we were absolutely murdering the world champions. We were so outplaying them. There was one incident where the ball was played just beyond Beckenbauer, and I turned and was going, and Beckenbauer literally just jumped on me and dragged me to the ground. And you know, these days, of course, he would have been sent off, but he wasn't even booked then. And it was about 15 minutes from the end of the game, and the ball was in the inside right position, just outside of the German penalty area. And Mick Shannon was fouled. A free kick was given, and as he was getting up off the ground, Alan Ball went round his outside, and so Mick, in a kneeling position, just nudged the ball into Alan Ball's path, and with his knee, and Bawley just first time, and it was a great cross that came right the way over to the far post. It sort of it beat Sepp Meyer, the goalkeeper. It went beyond Beckenbauer, and there was me on the far post, and I nodded it in from about 3 or 4 yards. Thank you very much. And well, I was absolutely delighted, as you can well imagine. You know, and with Bawley, I knew what he was going to do, because I always remember him. He once said to one young player, he said, just to let you know how I am as a player, he said, if the ball comes to me, when the ball comes to me, he said, make your run. He said, because I might well give it to you with the first touch. He said, but if I don't give it to you with the first touch, just change direction and make another run, because it'll definitely come with my next touch. He said, because you see, I've never had a third touch in my life. Some statement.
He didn't need it, Malcolm.
He didn't need it. No, if it doesn't come with me first touch, it'll definitely come with me second, he said, because I've never had a third touch in my life. You know, some players take 3 and 4 and 5 touches just to get it under control. Anyway,
which is awful for a striker, Malcolm, isn't it? Awful for a striker if it takes too many touches.
Yes, it is. But with Bawley, you knew that when the pass was just in front of him from Mick Shannon when he needed, and I knew Bawley was going to clip it straight away. He wasn't going to dilly-dally or look to take anybody on. It was just get it over into the danger area, and I finished it off. And that's how the game finished, 2-0. We've beaten the world champions, and not just beaten them, but it was a 2-0 hammering, really, because we completely outplayed them. So anyway, we're in the dressing room, and it's buzzing, and you know, and everybody's absolutely well pleased. And Don Revie walked in, and he went across to the goalkeeper, Peter Shilton. He said, well played, Peter, shook him by the hand, and then he went to the right back, well played, Colin, and shook him by the hand, well played, to the left back, and the 4 and the 5 and the 6. And he continued round, got to the 8, who was next to me, Mick Shannon, and he shook him by the hand. And then he walked past me, never said a word, never shook my hand, completely ignored me, shook hands with the 10 and then the 11, and walked out the dressing room. And I just sat there and I thought, what on earth is going on here? So I thought, well, I scored, so he's got to pick me for the next game. Well, that was in the October or November of '74, and the next game wasn't until March or April of, I think it was April of '75, and this happened to be the Cyprus game. And so I reported down at the hotel, West Lodge Park in Hertfordshire, and I checked in at reception and went through to the lounge and said to Revie, Malcolm McDonald reporting. I said, I've got no injuries from the game yesterday. And he said, the same applies as last time. If you don't score, I'll never pick you again. And I thought, oh, this is becoming pretty monotonous now. And so over dinner that evening, having kept totally quiet, I kept it entirely to myself for the West German game. I sat having dinner with Bawley, and I thought, I'm going to tell him. So I told Bawley what had been going on. And when I finished, and his face, there was a look of incredulity on it, and he listened. And when I finished telling him the story, he said, "You leave it with me." No, he didn't actually. He said, "You leave it with me." And he was a right little squeaker, was Bawley. And so I said, all right. So I just set about my training and my finishing, working on that, and knowing that I was playing again. And so how it worked on the Wednesday, prior to leaving the hotel for the Wembley Stadium, we had trained in the morning, we had had a bit of lunch, and then we went to bed for a couple of hours, and then we got up and we had a team meeting, and that's when Levy named the team that I, of course, had been told by him that I would be playing. And so at the end of the team meeting, and he'd come up with this dossier. He kept giving us these dossiers before each match. And so he had told us on the Sunday evening, we had to read through these dossiers and soak all the information up. And there was about 20 Cypriot names on this dossier with a full rundown to each individual. And I didn't recognise anything that was on there, nothing at all. And to be honest, what was being said, it was all a bit sketchy and patchy. And I got the feeling that it was pretty much just made up. It was made up stuff. Because Cyprus, at the time, it had had a bit of a civil war, and so they were sort of the country, the island was separated between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. I know in the north of Cyprus there were tanks on the streets and what have you. So it was a very difficult time for them. But anyway, so so we got to the ground, and on the team sheet there wasn't a single name from the dossier that appeared on the team sheet, and so we were pretty sure it had all been made up. It was all a load of funk. Anyway, so having sat through this team talk of Revi's, which didn't really make a great deal of sense, and it was more about Cyprus than how we should play. And he never sort of really got round to that. So we sort of knew that we had to make it up for ourselves. Anyway, at the end of that team talk, we then had to go and get our bags from our rooms and get onto the bus and travel down to Wembley. And as everybody was departing the meeting room, Bawley said, "Mel, over here." And so as I went over, he then said, "Huddy, over here," to Alan Hudson. And then Mick Shannon was going, Mick, over here. And Bawley told the two lads, Mick Shannon and Alan Hudson, what Revi had been doing and saying to me. And they both looked and went, "Oh, that's out of order." So Bawley said, "Yeah," he said, "now I've got a question for you. What's the goal scoring record for England?" And we said, don't know, haven't got a clue, don't know. So he said, well, I can tell you, in 1938 at Windsor Park in Belfast, England beat Ireland 5-0 and Willie Hall scored all 5. He said, tonight, this man, pointing to me, is going to break that record and we're going to make him 6 goals. Are you up for it? And they went, yeah, oh, yeah, we're up for it. And so it was quite a moment because I've got these 3 absolutely brilliant, great players, Mick Shannon, Alan Hudson, and World Cup winner Alan Ball. And they're just intending to go out there and make me goals. What more could one ask? And so off we went, got on the bus, got down to Wembley, and out we went. And it was after about 15, 16, 17 minutes, we had a free kick out in the left wing, some 30 yards from the corner flag, and Alan Hudson took it, swung it in beautifully, and I was coming in on the far post, and I shoved Dave Watson, the centre half, out the way, and got my head to it, and it went, and that made it 1-0. Great, terrific. Ball has come running across the pitch to me, and he's gone, that's your first. He said, you've only got 5 more to go. And I went, oh, right, Paulie, thanks very much. So the game restarted, and a bit later, Mick Shannon did a little bit of magic on the dead ball line and knocked the ball back, and I volleyed that into the far post. That made it 2-0. And Ballie's come running across, and he's gone, that's your second. He said, you've got 4 more to go. So half-time came, and we were out for the second half. And Kevin Keegan did a little bit of magic this time on the left-hand side, and he knocked across a lovely little ball, and I literally dived onto that and headed that one in. And that made it 3-0, and Ballie's run across, and he's gone, that's your first hat-trick. Now he says you go for your second hat-trick. So we're 3-0 up, and we are absolutely in total control of the game, has to be said. And a substitution was made, and Dave Thomas, County Durham lad, but he was playing for Queen's Park Rangers. He came on, terrific crosser of the ball, and Bawley knew it, and so Bawley sort of worked his way into the inside right position and just started feeding Dave Thomas down the flanks in behind the fullback. And Dave Thomas, the first cross he hit over was absolutely magnificent, and so I've got right up above the centre half and headed that into the far top corner. And Bawley's come running across. That's the one, yes. Yeah, centre half try, overhead kick it, can you believe? And that went flying in, 4-0 it made it. And so Bawley's come running across, and he's gone, that's your 4th, he said. You've got 2 more to go. Come on, just 2 more. Loads of time. And then Dave Thomas knocked another ball in, and that was great ball, eluded everybody, and I just literally nodded that in, and I sort of ducked down and headed it in, and that made it 5-0. Ballers come running across, and he said, right, you've got 5, you've equalled the record, now you go for your last goal this evening, he said, and that's the one that will break the record. As it so happened, I did score again, but it was disallowed for somebody else being offside. And then I hit the post. It didn't half hurt. And then the the final whistle went, and we'd beaten Cyprus 5-0. I'd scored all 5, and I've had people say to me, "Yeah, but it was only against Cyprus, wasn't it?" And my point to them is, but nobody else scored on the night. Nobody else at all. Anyway, so we were in the penalty area of the Cypriots at the very far end to the tunnel, and we were shaking hands with the Cypriots. And at the far end, above the tunnel, was a small sort of like 4 foot, 5 foot square electric scoreboard that had sort of just been keeping the tally of the score line going through the evening. And I just happened to look up at it, and it went blank. And I carried on shaking Cypriot hands, and then I noticed that the board had lit up, but this time it was different to what it had been running through the game. And this time it said, "Congratulations, Supermac 5, Cyprus 0." And I just looked at it for a few seconds and I thought, wow, that's all my boyhood dreams come true in one evening. And it was quite a moment, just stood there. Then reality struck, and I thought, where are you, bastard? And I looked around, and there was Dom Revy over by the far corner, and walking around the track, trench coat on, hands in his pockets, head down, and he was marching back towards the tunnel. And so we got ourselves back into the dressing room, and we were all congratulating each other and what have you. And Revy walked in, and he went across and he shook hands with the goalkeeper, Peter Schilt, and he shook hands then with Colin Todd, the right back, and David Nish, the left back, and congratulated each and every one of them, and continued round 4, 5, 6, 7, shook hands with Mick Shannon next to me, walked past me, never said a word, never shook my hand, nothing. It was as if I didn't exist. And so I never played at Wembley again after that. I played in 1.5 away matches following that, but I knew that was the end of my time with Dom Revy. And then he did the dirty, of course, and walked out in the FA. But Ron Greenwood then came in, and Ron Greenwood, I got the feeling that he wasn't my kind of football fan, if you like. That he was very much the do it by the tactics book, you know. So he wanted the sort of Jeff Hurst type figure and what have you. And so I never played for England again, and yet I was the sort of top goal scorer in the following years each time, and never got a look in. So sad days those, but I enjoyed it when I was there. I really did. And there is one person that I haven't mentioned, and that was Sir Alf Ramsey. I thought he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Wonderful man, and he was such a great enthusiast with each and every player, and he just wanted to help get the very best out of each individual, and he was a true gent, absolute true gent was Alf.
Can we pick up from there? Yes, because you know, Malcolm's England career, it began with a debut in May '72, 3-0 win over Wales when Malcolm was only 22, and new,
Yeah.
relatively new at Newcastle, right through to his final appearance in 75, which is a 1-1 draw with Poland, which we'll be going into in a few moments. But it left Malcolm with a career record of 14 caps and 6 goals, which is quite a return, goals per game return. Started, as Malcolm hinted at there, with Alf Ramsey, taking us through the caretaker reign of Joe Mercer onto Don Revie, and then eventually, as Malcolm said, Ron Greenwood came in. But can we go back to Ramsey, Malcolm, because this was your England breakthrough.
Mm.
This was the legendary England manager of all time, having won the World Cup in 1966 and became, of course, Sir Alf Ramsey as a result of that. And a different type of manager to a lot, Malcolm. A stickler, very precise, knew what he wanted. And I remember a fun story you told me once at a team meeting involving Bobby Moore and another with Jeff Hurst. But can you elaborate on those, mate?
Yeah, on the Bobby Moore one, we were playing Italy at Wembley, and we had the team talk prior to the match, late afternoon, before we got on the bus to travel to Wembley, and it was a big sort of social room, and so just in the middle there was a plinth, and they put a desk and a couple of chairs there for Alf to sit at. So he was slightly raised, and for us, just in front of this plinth was a whole raft of chairs which we were sat on, and then it was sort of big spaces all around us, and to one side, it was as we were sat looking at Alf, it was off to our left-hand side. There were huge curtains, floor to ceiling, right the way across, and behind were big glass French doors. Right in the middle, there was a little chink at the very top of the curtains, and there was a raft of sunlight coming in. And as Alf was speaking, now what everybody's got to realise is that Alf was incredibly precise. He went into full and absolute detail, never left anything out. He never had notes either. He just did it all from the top of his head. And he would give this incredible rundown, and everything was in order. He would give the rundown on the team generally that we were due to play against. And then he would go to the individuals and he would give us the rundown on the goalkeeper, all his strengths, his weaknesses, the kind of game that he had, whether he came for crosses and stuff like that. And then he would go to the right back, and then he would go to the left back, and then he would go to the centre halves, and he would give us a full detailed rundown on every individual. We knew how the team played, but now we were getting how every individual played, strengths, weaknesses, all the while with him. And his team talks always lasted precisely 2 hours. Never a minute 59, never 2 hours and a minute. It was always precisely 2 hours. How he did it, I could never work out. It was always precise. And so he is in the middle of telling us all about Italy and their individual players. And he's talking about Riva and Rivera, the great midfield players. And he's just waxing lyrical about what great players they were. And by heavens, yes, they were. And there has been this shaft of sunlight coming through the afternoon sun, shining through this V in the curtains at the very top. And it's just this narrow shaft of sunlight, and it is right on the side of Bobby Moore's face, and he's sat in the middle of everybody. And so he can't move left or right. And this shaft of sunlight is just constantly on his cheek. And Alf is in the middle of a sentence, and all of a sudden we hear, and we've all looked to the centre where the noises come from, and Moro has fallen asleep. And he's sort of sneezing, and Alf, he's just stopped in mid-sentence. He's looked up, sees the situation, and he said, Emlyn, to Emlyn Hughes, Emlyn, would you mind giving Robert a nudge, please? And so Emlyn's gone, Moro, wake up. And Moro, he's come to, realised the situation, and he's looked around and he's gone, oh my word. He said, oh, Alf, I am so dreadfully sorry. I can't apologise enough. He said, it's this shaft of sunlight, the warmth on my face, and I've just nodded off. And Alf has let Moro completely finish whatever it was that he wanted to say. And Moro, having finished, Alf has looked at him and has said, Robert, I am not concerned that you fell asleep. He said, because I understand you have heard all of this 107 times before. Now, would you mind just concentrating this one final time? And we all looked around and went, is that giving Moro the job? And it was. Moro never played again. That was his last game against Italy. It was his 108th cap, and that was it. And he was never selected again. And it was just the way that Alf will put it over to people. And and having said what he had to say, he just carried on. Now, whether it was pre-planned for him that this was going to be Moro's last game, we don't know, because Alf would never say, he would never go into detail. Only about the football would he go into detail. And Moro, that was it. That was his final game. And what a great player, great skipper, and a lovely man as well, I have to say. He always went out of his way, did Moro. Whenever a new guy came into the England squad, he'd always go and welcome him specially and take him around and sort of show him how it all went. And he would always make the new guy feel very welcome and very much a part of the whole unit. Yeah, fabulous fella. So sorry that he's no longer with us. Yeah, he was
the
quite
interesting
special.
thing, Malcolm, what you were saying about Alfie and the way he said to Moro there, will you please concentrate for the one last time? Remember the expression you told me that he said to Jeff Hurst out in the car park?
Oh, right. I was doing a television program, the Anne Robinson program.
Yeah.
And there was a whole group of it was called The Weakest Link. Thanks, my wife's just reminded me.
Yeah.
It was called The Weakest Link, and there was a number of international footballers on this particular one, all bar one person, and that was Ken Wolstenholme, who was, of course, the commentator of the England versus West Germany World Cup final back in 1966, and became ultra famous for that wonderful line, "They think it's all over." It is now, when Hursting knocked the fourth goal in his third. And so we were sort of some way through the programme, and there was a technical hitch. And so we were asked if we go to the green room, and we were told, "You may be there some time. It could take us quite a while to get this glitch sorted out." So we were all sat having a cup of tea or coffee in the green room, and so we just started relaying little stories of things that had happened to us all during our careers. And Jeff Hurst, he said, "Look," he said, I'll tell you something." He said, "But I've never told anybody before." He said, "But we're all sort of international players here." He said, "Just so long as it doesn't go out of this room." Well, I'm sure that he won't mind me telling it, because it just expressed Alf Ramsey to an absolute T. It expressed him perfectly. And the story was that England, a couple of days before the World Cup final, Alf Ramsey said to them, "Now, gentlemen, the FA have got this big do organised at a big hotel in Mayfair. Now, we don't know what's going to happen on Saturday afternoon. So, do you want on the Saturday night to go to this do, or would you prefer not to, and what else would you like to do?" And so they all sort of got into a bit of a huddle, and they went mutter. And Bobby Moore, the skipper, he said, "No, we thought about it, Alf." And he said, "Look, we've all been together now for over 6 weeks, and without wives and our girlfriends, what we'd like, whether we win or we lose, we'd just like to have a bit of peaceful time and with the wives and girlfriends all together." So Alf said, "Fine, no problem." He said, we'll have a lovely night here at this hotel, and all the wives and the girlfriends, of course, will come and join us straight from Wembley." And so that was it. And Alf, he would never go to the FA or whoever, whichever body, and say the players have decided. It was always Alf that decided. He would take always the blame. And so he went, and he said, "I have decided that the players, they need to just have a little bit of privacy after the game, a good meal, a couple of beers maybe, and time with their wives and girlfriends, so they won't be coming on Saturday night to your shindig." And so that's exactly what the players have done. And of course, it was made an even greater night because of the fact that they won the World Cup 4-2. And it was the most incredible and thrilling game. And so afterwards, they all went back to the hotel, and the wives and the girlfriends came and joined them, and so the hotel was just occupied solely by the England squad and what have you. And they had this lovely time, had a meal and what have you, and a few drinks. And the following morning, there were a few who were a bit slow to get up, but Jeff Hurst and his wife, they had things to do. They had people to go and see. So they got up fairly early-ish in the morning on the Sunday morning, and they went down and they had breakfast. And they had left their bags at reception, and having had breakfast, and there was one or two other players and their wives there, and so Jeff and his wife, they said, right, see you folks, we've got family to go and see and spend a bit of time with. And so they went out, and Jeff, being the gentleman, saw his wife into the passenger seat, shut the door, and was walking back around the car, and he saw Alf come out of the hotel door and was just stood there outside, taking a good breath of morning air, enjoying the sunshine. And so Jeff waved at him and he said, "See you next match then, Alf." And Alf looked across and said, "If selected."
Absolutely.
And that was out, and it was his hat-trick hero of the day, but it wasn't going to sway him too much. And we, all the players, just absolutely loved him. I always remember there was a dinner in a big hotel in London, organised for Alf Ramsey, and he had selected in total, this was after he was England manager, during his reign as England manager, he had selected a total of 112 players. How many of those do you think turned up at the dinner? What would you reckon?
Well, virtually all of them, I'm suspecting.
Well, you're right, John. Yeah. Of the 112 players he had selected, there were 108. And yeah, and the other 4 wouldn't go because they had fallen out with him, they had disagreed with him and what have you. But that's an amazing percentage of loyalty to the man. I think it would have been an empty hall if it had been a dinner for Dom Revie.
I was about to say, I can think of somebody that would have been missing on Don Revie for starters, Mal. If we can move on from the Ramsey thing, Mal, to you had the interim caretaker manager of England, Joe Mercer.
John, sorry, can I just interrupt? Can I just tell you about the demise of Alf Ramsey and how it happened?
Go on.
Well, having won the World Cup, he'd obviously got these World Cup players, all of different ages, and so sort of one by one they started to drop out, George Cohen and Ray Wilson and what have you. And by the time that we were getting to 1974, there were just 2 of that 1966 side remaining, and they were the 2 youngsters from the side, Martin Peters and Alan Ball. And we went over to Portugal to play Portugal in Lisbon and at the Stadio de Luce, the real Stadium of Light, that is, that's the home of Benfica. That Alf put together a side, and he left a huge number of other players out of it as well. And he had Martin Peters and Alan Ball as the 2 experienced players, and he picked youngsters. And he said to us before the game, "This is going to be the new England." And I looked around, and what I realised was I was the 4th most experienced guy in the whole setup. And I just got sort of, I hadn't reached double figures in caps at that stage, and there was Alan Ball and Martin Peters, who I've mentioned. Then there was Mick Shannon, who had a few more caps than me. Then it was me, and then came Kevin Keegan, and then there was and brought in was Trevor Brooking and a whole host. Phil Parks, I think, played in goal. And so out came this wonderfully exciting young England team, and this was going to be the new look. And so we played against Portugal, who were a hell of a side then. And this young side absolutely murdered them, really murdered them. And the crazy thing was that their goalkeeper, he must have made a dozen unbelievable saves. And we hit the woodwork about 5 times. And it was just one of those days. And despite how well we had played, we just couldn't stick the ball in the net. And so it finished 0-0. And after that game, believe it or not, they sacked Alf Ramsey. And none of us could believe it, because this was the dawning of a new era. The team had played absolutely fantastically. And they decided to boot him. And I think that it must have saddened Alf so much that this next side of his wasn't going to be given the opportunity to really flourish. And then, of course, so through the summer, England always went away.
Malcolm, after the Ramsey reign came to an end, we had the short period with a caretaker manager, Joe Mercer, and one of the big things that emerged from the Mercer time as manager was the famous Kevin Keegan situation abroad when he was asleep on the baggage roundabout. It was a massive story at the time. Can you fill us in on it, mate?
Yeah, it was prior to playing Yugoslavia. We'd arrived in Belgrade Airport. We had flown from, I believe, Sofia in Bulgaria, and we had had a late night prior, and we'd flown in on Bulgarian Airlines, and Kevin Keegan had fallen asleep on the plane. We got onto it very early in the morning, and he sort of got to his seat, strapped himself in, and went to sleep. And the only real activity was there were 4 of us who would play cribbage, and that was Mick Shannon, Martin Peters, myself, and Monty Fresco, the Daily Mirror cameraman, if you remember, John, who was a lovely guy. And so we'd been playing a bit of cribbage, and it was a nothing event, this flight into Belgrade, nothing untoward whatsoever, and so in the Belgrade airport, there was a conveyor belt that we had been told our luggage was due to come in on, and Kevin, he laid himself down on this conveyor belt, which was still, it wasn't moving, and he went back to sleep. And so we were all just sort of hanging around and waiting, and this was something that we had to get used to, because when we went to sort of the Soviet countries and Yugoslavia, it wasn't exactly a part of them, but there was a connection. It was more communist than anything else, and and so they all just kept the England side waiting and waiting and waiting, and so we just kept our mouths shut and got used to it. And the next thing, because behind the conveyor belt there was like a big wooden hut, and out of there came seriously armed police guards, seriously armed, machine guns, pistols, and they came out and they just grabbed Kevin Keegan, who had been asleep, off the conveyor belt and dragged him backwards into this police hut that it turned out to be, and the door slammed, and we went, whoa, what's going on? And so we looked to like the more senior members of the party, like the FA. There was a number of the FA there, the International Committee and what have you. And we said, hey, come on, you need to get something done about this. And then we started to hear cries coming from inside this hut, yells and yelps. And there were muffled sounds, that were that kind of muffled sound, followed by yelps. And so we're trying to get the attention of the FA members, who actually scarpered. They scarpered out the airport, and they couldn't get out there quick enough, really. And I presume somebody was left behind to collect all their bags for them, but they just got out of this situation. And so we were, as a group of young men, we were seriously considering and discussing going over the conveyor belt and forcing our way into this into this police hut, and so as we started to sort of gather on the verge of crossing the conveyor belt, all of a sudden the door opened and 4 policemen came out and just pointed machine guns straight at us. So we had to have second thoughts and what to do. And in the end, the baggage thing, the carousel, that started to move, and bags started to come through. But we were more wanting to get Kevin out of this situation, and there was just nothing at all. And in the end, somebody must have phoned the English embassy, because a guy came from the embassy and he instructed us, and where he realised that we were being somewhat defiant towards him, he pleaded with us, you must leave the airport. So he got us to leave the airport. We weren't happy about going to the hotel, so he said, right, he instructed the bus to take us to the English embassy, and then later we went to the hotel, but then we went back again to the English embassy, and finally the embassy staff had persuaded the police to let Kevin go, and he came and joined us at the embassy. By heavens, what a mess his face was. Serious mess. And so we then went to the hotel. The fellow from the embassy, he came with us and he sat us down in a room, and he gave us, if you like, a sort of a team talk on international affairs and how it works and what we mustn't do and what we must do. And the one thing was that we realised not to make a fuss about this whilst we remained in Yugoslavia. And still the FA members, they just weren't to be seen at all. Joe Mercer, he was the manager, but Joe wasn't a well man, not well at all. And he lived in constant pain and had to take painkillers and what have you. And so Joe couldn't get that involved with it all, really. And he was a lovely man, Joe, really was, a great enthusiast. And I would have loved to have met him as a manager when he had been younger. But he had to make the decisions, bless him. But he was sort of passing it over, really, to the embassy people. And Kevin having come back in such a dreadful state, we said, right, there is no way we are playing on Wednesday night. No way are we facing Yugoslavia after what's happened, unless there is a major apology from them, personally, to Kevin. And again, the fella from the embassy said, I don't think that's advisable. He said, we have to deal in mysterious ways over here. And what I suggest is that you get out on the pitch, you play the game, and go and beat the bastards. He said, that'll be your best answer. And as it so happens, we went out on the pitch and we did beat the bastards. We beat them 3-2. And we weren't sure on leaving the airport the next day that Kevin was going to get through. We really weren't sure that he was going to be allowed to leave the country. So again, the guy from the embassy, he was there, and he made sure that each and every one of us got through customs and all the checks and what have you. And we got onto the plane, and this time it was the England plane, the British Airways plane, and we got this feel, because everywhere we went, every summer, we went in this same plane that British Airways provided us, but they have been denied the right to land in both Bulgaria, I think it might have been Russia as well, and in Yugoslavia. And so with that, we got the impression, because the British Airways plane had been barred from landing, and therefore we had to take the other national carriers, their planes. We felt the whole thing was a setup, and that it was planned that they were going to do something like this. And we could never prove it, of course, not in a 1,000 years, but the suspicion has remained always that this thing was a complete setup in the first place.
Mal, your England caps, your 4 England caps, all came with Newcastle United, although you were transferred to Arsenal, a top club in London itself, and had 2 fabulous seasons with them before the knee injury came along and ruined everything. But your feeling perhaps was that the move to Arsenal coincided with Ron Greenwood becoming the England manager, and as you've already hinted, he wasn't your sort of manager, and that spelled effectively the end of a very eventful England career.
Yeah. I'd had an absolute fabulous last 2 seasons at Newcastle in terms of goals scored. And then I went to Arsenal, and in 2 seasons I scored 61 goals spread over those 2 seasons, and was just completely and utterly ignored. John, there wasn't a hint of possibility that I might get into the England squad with Ron Greenwood. It was just a totally closed situation to me. And as I said earlier on, I just felt that he wanted the more technical players, whereas I played very much off the cuff. I played it as I saw it, and would sort of go outside of team tactics if I could find a goal scoring opportunity. He wanted it all kept all nicely wrapped and parcelled, and I wasn't that kind of a person, wasn't that kind of a player, and so c'est la vie. That was pretty much it, and I met Ron Greenwood, but it was something that he never ever wanted to discuss, so I never pushed the matter with him, really.
But from our point of view, Malcolm, a career finished far too early, 29 years of age. But we treasure your time at Newcastle, your goal scoring records, 2 Wembley Cup appearances, and all your England caps with us. So we'll claim you completely, mate, as ours, and be very grateful that happened. Smashing to remember such wonderful times, mate.
Well, thanks, John. What I would say is that I would say thank you. A number of managers helped me in my career. Harry Haslam at Tunbridge, then Bobby Robson at Fulham, and the guys that I'm mentioning, there was one thing very similar amongst all of them. Harry Haslam followed then by Alex Stock, and then came Joe Harvey. All 4 of those managers, they let me go out and play the way I saw it. They didn't tie me down at all, and I think they just saw in me that my speed was the main asset, and speed, of course, can just destroy defences. And so they let me go and perfect that to the very best that I could. And I thank them all for it. But of course, once you come up with somebody like Ron Greenwood, it doesn't work with those that do it by the book. They want players who play by the book. But thanks to those 4 guys who gave me all the opportunity in the world, and I thoroughly enjoyed working under them, with them, and listening to what they had to say, and it improved my game tremendously.
And I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to those recollections of Malcolm's England career today. John, just want to thank you for your preparation as always. Great to have you on board with this. And Malcolm, thanks for sharing your memories, some which I'd heard before and some which I hadn't. But as always, an absolute pleasure to listen to the pair of you talk about football in general.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. And John, thanks very much indeed.
Been my pleasure over the years, Malcolm.
Great stuff. Take care, lads. Thanks very much.
Take care now. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.